the unseen watcher. In the small, forgotten town of Eldridge Hollow, where the fog clung to the ground like a shroud and the trees whispered secrets to one another, there existed an unsettling legend. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the unseen watcher, a malevolent presence that lurked in the shadows, observing their every move. It was said that those who felt its gaze would be marked for misfortune, their lives spiraling into chaos, as if the very fabric of reality unraveled before them. The legend had been passed down through generations, but as time wore on, it became little more than a ghost story told around flickering campfires. That is until Sarah Thompson moved back to Eldridge Hollow after years away. She was a skeptic by nature, a journalist with a penchant for debunking myths and exposing the truth. The tales of the unseen watcher intrigued her. She saw them as nothing more than folklore, a relic of a superstitious past. Sarah settled into her grandmother's old house at the edge of town, a creaking structure that had seen better days. It was here that she began her investigation into the legend. Each night, she would sit at her desk, surrounded by dusty tomes and faded newspaper clippings, piecing together the history of Eldridge Hollow and its dark secrets. As days turned into weeks, Sarah began to notice strange occurrences. Shadows danced just beyond her line of sight. Whispers echoed through the empty halls when no one else was there. She dismissed these sensations as figments of her imagination, stress from her research or perhaps remnants of childhood fears creeping back into her mind. But then came the night when everything changed. It was a stormy evening. Rain lashed against the windows like frantic fingers clawing for entry. Sarah sat hunched over her desk, scribbling notes about an old disappearance case linked to the unseen watcher. The air felt thick with tension, and an inexplicable chill settled in her bones. As lightning illuminated the room in brief flashes, she caught sight of something, a fleeting shadow darting past her peripheral vision. Heart racing, she turned to confront whatever it was, but found only darkness staring back at her. Dismissing it as another trick of light, or perhaps fatigue from too many late nights spent poring over ancient texts, she returned to her work. But that night marked the beginning of her descent into terror. The following days were plagued by nightmares. Vivid visions of dark figures lurking just outside her window, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly hunger. Each morning she awoke drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if trying to escape from some unseen predator. Her friends began to notice changes in her demeanor. She became withdrawn and paranoid, convinced that someone or something was watching her every move. One evening, while walking through town to clear her mind, Sarah overheard two elderly women gossiping on a park bench. Their conversation turned toward the unseen watcher and its latest victim, a young man who had vanished without a trace just days before. "He thought he could ignore it," one woman said with a shudder. "He didn't believe until it was too late." Cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach as she realized how closely this mirrored her own situation. She had been digging too deep into things best left buried. Perhaps there were truths better left undiscovered. Determined to confront this entity head-on rather than cower in fear, Sarah devised a plan. She would set up cameras around her home and document any strange occurrences. If there truly was something watching her, she would capture it on film and expose it for what it was, an illusion born from fear. That night, armed with determination and an array of recording devices scattered throughout the house, Sarah settled down for what she hoped would be an uneventful evening. Hours passed in silence until just after midnight, when everything changed once more. A low growl reverberated through the walls, a sound so primal it sent shivers racing down Sarah's spine. Her heart thundered in response as she grabbed one of the cameras and crept toward the source of the noise. The basement door stood ajar, darkness spilling out like ink across parchment. With each step down those creaking stairs, it felt like stepping deeper into hell itself. Shadows twisted around her ankles like serpents, eager to drag her down into their abyss. As she reached the bottom step and flicked on the light switch, the bulb flickered ominously before dying completely. She felt it, a presence behind her. Spinning around with camera raised high like a shield against whatever horror awaited her, Sarah caught only glimpses. A figure cloaked in darkness with eyes that glimmered like shards of glass reflecting moonlight. It stood still for just a moment, before lunging forward with unnatural speed. The camera fell from Sarah's grasp as she stumbled backward in terror. Instinct took over as she fled up the stairs 2 at a time, her breath coming in ragged gasps, while panic clawed at her throat like talons seeking purchase. She slammed shut the basement door behind her and leaned against it, desperately trying to catch her breath. But even then, the feeling remained, the sensation that something was still watching, waiting, hungry for more than just fear. Days turned into weeks filled with paranoia. Shadows seemed longer than they should be, while whispers echoed through empty rooms long after dusk fell upon Eldridge Hollow once more. Friends grew distant as they sensed something amiss within Sarah, a darkness that clung to her like smoke refusing to dissipate, despite every effort made towards normalcy. Then came Halloween night, the air thick with anticipation as children roamed freely dressed as ghouls and goblins. But for Sarah, it felt different this year. An electric charge hung heavy over everything, a sense that something wicked stirred beneath its surface, ready to break free from its chains once more. As midnight approached, the witching hour, Sarah found herself drawn outside against all reason, compelled by forces beyond comprehension towards an ancient oak tree standing sentinel at town's edge, where legends whispered tales long forgotten by time itself. And there beneath its gnarled branches, she saw him, the young man who had vanished weeks prior, his eyes hollowed out like sockets carved from stone, while his mouth twisted into an eternal scream frozen upon his lips. "Help me," he rasped, a voice barely above a whisper yet echoing through eternity itself. "It watches, always watches." In that moment, realization struck hard. The unseen watcher wasn't merely folklore. It thrived on fear, feeding off despair, until nothing remained but hollow shells left behind. With newfound clarity coursing through veins once filled only with doubt, Sarah turned away from him, knowing full well what must be done. To confront this entity head-on, rather than succumb further into madness. But even as she fled back towards town, the shadows lengthened behind, growing darker still until they enveloped everything within their grasp, leaving nothing but silence where laughter once echoed freely among friends gathered round bonfires bright. And so Eldridge Hollow remained forever haunted by the unseen watcher, a specter lurking just beyond sight, waiting patiently for its next victim, drawn forth by curiosity or despair alike. For those who dared look too closely might find themselves ensnared within its grasp, never again able to escape its watchful gaze.